G'day. Today we set up a gravity-fed fuel line, check the oil and move on to a first start. I've disconnected the fuel line from the output of the petrol pump here and slung it up here on a cable tie with a little funnel so it'll gravity feed some fuel down to the carburetor for a test. I'm going to pour a bit of petrol in there and drain it out down here initially just to see that the hose is clear, and then I'm going to go ahead and temporarily fit the carburetor up and see whether this thing will start. Continuing with hooking up this carburetor for a trial run. That's the throttle cable and the choke attached. They're the more difficult ones. Now I think they've got 3 vent pipes or pulse pipes and things to put on and a fuel line, and I've got to slot it into the intake manifold. Just swinging around. That's my gravity feed fuel line, just hooked up to the line that came from the petrol pump. I don't know what the fuel in the tank's like. I think I'll drain that and clear the system out before I try and fire fuel down this system. I run a bit of fuel in there and drained it here just to check that line is clear, and we'll continue on. I'll now attach them with the flexible hoses to this carburetor. That's the hoses back on, the cover on the throttle fuel line. This is the one that goes up to the T-piece at the top there. This one on the top of the carburetor goes to the petcock, and this little one down the side goes into the plastic fitting there, the white plastic fitting. It goes round to the back of the fuel pump. Over here it's the pulse line for the fuel pump. So they're connected. Now I'm going to slot the front of the carburetor in to the intake pipe, then juggle the airbox and get it in place. The airbox is in good shape. I've given it a wipe down on the outside. Not particularly thoroughly, but that's the outside. I've had the air cleaner, the air filter itself out, and wiped around on the inside pretty well. I didn't wash the filter. It's so clean that I gave the outside surface of it a little bit of a brush to knock some of the slightly larger particles off it. And so look, it's good to go for our test, so I'll put the lid on and try and mate it up with the intake pipe that is a real hassle. As you can see, I've tucked the carburetor back in there, hopefully roughly the same position it came out. It is a bit of a juggle as to where all those tubes go, but I think there was a slight advantage in having the airbox loose in juggling this connector on. It still only saved a little bit. So I've got the snorkel back attached, all the tubes on, the airbox screwed in, found another screw for the one missing. And all of this is just to see whether, now that I've fixed carby and valves, whether I can get it started. The other thing I want to check is the oil situation, because around the other side it looks like the oil is over full. That's the oil fill indicator there. It's either got none or it's full beyond the fill mark. There's two little marks on the side here, a high and a low for the oil. The high is up here, so you should see a little bit of a moon shape at the above that. I think it's over full. What I'm going to do is tip the back of the bike up, get to the oil drain plug and drain a bit out until I can see it in this window. Tip a bit of it back in if it looks clean. We'll go looking for some new oil if it's not. I've tipped the bike up here to give you about a shot of where the oil drain plug is. There it is there. It's the 17mm hex head cover, which I will remove. And I've got a pan down here. I will loosen the bolt till I've got it finger tight, and then I'll lower the quad back closer to horizontal and let it drain. There's a rubber washer around, or a large rubber fitting around here to try and get all the oil to come out here, and rather than flood onto the bottom of that skid pan. It gets pretty deteriorated if it's anything like my other bike. So you then end up having oil running out some of these other holes, and it gets a bit messy, but we'll see how we go. Interesting to note that with the bike up at this angle, I've removed that drain plug and no oil came out. So what's oil's in there is all run up into the, up around the crankcase, and there's nothing around the drain plug. So I think if I start to lower bike now, we'll see some oil come out at some point. Hopefully. There she starts now. So there is oil in there. I expected there to be oil in there. I think there's been a reasonable regime of maintenance on this bike. Changing oil is a pretty simple thing to do. I think they've done that. So better flow there now. What I've done is I've lifted that up and stopped the flow, because I'm going to put the plug back in and then go around and see whether I can see the level in the sight glass, because I think it was just over full, and I'm sure I've drained enough out now so that it won't be over full. So in that sight glass there now, I'm not seeing any oil before it was over full. So the amount I've just drained out has taken it from over full to, I think there might be a dribble shown in the bottom there, but I'll start adding what I've just removed and try and bring it up to the right level. In fact, as I'm watching that, oil is running back from some of the places that probably shouldn't have been, or doesn't normally get to, like up at the back of the piston and areas. I think it's running back into the reserve tank, and you can see the level is has climbed even while I'm watching it. I think I've tried to get it on relatively level at the moment with these back wheels the same distance off the ground as the front ones that are sitting up on stools. I don't think it needs a lot of the oil I've just taken out, put back. That's almost at the minimum mark down here. That's the minimum mark, and the maximum mark's about this level. And as we're watching it there, I think the oil's come back to about the minimum mark. I think there's at least a cupful, if not more, in that oil pan that I drained into. And yeah, as I talk, that level is coming up. It is yeah, as I said, the oil will be running back. I don't think much more will run back. Surely it's got to be only dripping back at this stage. But anyway, I'll add some of that oil, bring it up another 5 or 6 millimeters or something, which puts it mid-range, certainly enough to start the engine safely. With it over full, not sure how that affects the operation of the engine. You may get parts of the crankshaft slopping around in oil where it shouldn't be. The other thing that can happen is that fuel can leak past the carburetor and into the cylinder, and then down past the rings and start filling up the crankshaft, the crankcase with petrol and oil, and that can create an overfill in the crankcase. But I don't think that's the case here. That oil level there looks pretty good, but if anything, I've got the back raised a little bit high, and I noticed if I drop the back down much lower than the front, doesn't have to be much lower, a couple of inches lower than the front, then that oil level drops down to about the minimum. So I'm just going to leave it at this height for my startup, and hopefully the oil pump's got plenty of oil to suck around, and it's I think the oil is due for a change. So when I get an oil filter in, and I've got one on order, I will start the bike, warm everything up and drain the oil out so that we get most of it out when it's warm, and I'll drain it with the oil filter cover off, and possibly the oil pickup filter in the bottom. If I remove the bash plate, I can get to it, and also have a look at if there's anything stuck in the grate. I doubt whether it is. I think this bike's been pretty well looked after. I'm going to add a bit of fuel to this gravity feed tank. It should be running down there through to the carby bowl. And then it will start to fill here. I don't know whether it would be trickling into the carby bowl, or might just let that sit for a minute and go and have a visual inspection under the carburetor just to see it's not just pouring out somewhere. I can't see any drips under the carburetor. Wouldn't really be expecting to see anything. But, so that fuel's gone somewhere, hopefully into the float bowl. And if that's the case, we've now got fuel and a spark, and the valves are right. It's got some oil. I don't think there's any reason why it shouldn't run. That fuel's disappeared, so we'll give it a bit more. I think this bottle had a bit more than a cup in it to start with. I'm not detecting any leaks. I don't know whether that level is holding a bit better this time. Okay, I've got the ignition on, the kill switch on, the choke on, and I think it'll go. Okay. I'm going to stop there because I might try and use two hands to see whether a bit of throttle or a bit of choke or what is needed. It may potentially be, look, all of that fuel's run down. If it's all just running freely into the cylinder, it'll be flooded, I don't know, so let me have a play. running. It's pumping fuel out of this petrol pump, which is fuel that's in the petrol tank. Well, that was an interesting first start. There's a few problems. One that's not really, probably could be expected, was because there's fuel still in this fuel tank, the fuel pump was squirting a bit of fuel out of here. And then I figured, well, I should be able to just turn the valve on the bottom of the fuel tank to off. Well, the petcock problem is probably the least of my issues. The petcock I will take off the bike and clean out when I flush out the fuel tank. Having a think about the startup of the engine, the first problem in looking back at the video was that the starter stalled almost immediately, and I'm thinking that that's because petrol has run down into the cylinder and it hydraulically locked on the first two attempts to start, and then it cleared that fuel, and then it would have been terribly flooded. But the amount of fuel that I poured down that funnel to get the bike going, it was just running away somewhere, and I suspect the needle and seat in the float is open and it's just letting the petrol pour straight through the float, and it's overflowing into the carburetor and then flowing through into the cylinder. So the carburetor's got to come off again, and the new needle and seat checked to see whether it's shutting off the fuel. I don't suspect it is. You can test that by just blowing through the fuel line, or where the fuel line connects to the carburetor, and tipping the carburetor up so that the float valve is operating, and it should stop the air that you're trying to blow in from getting through. So I didn't do that when I was doing the carburetor. I need to do that when I take it off. The idle speed was way too high, and I'm guessing that's because it had way too much fuel going in. It didn't need any choke, and it just ran. I wound the idle adjuster right out, and it wasn't slowing it down. I reread the workshop manual, and there's a couple of things I think I can improve on, and I will do that in the next video. So get out of your shed and have some fun yourself.